Are you tired not knowing what to do in situations? Do you sometimes have a hard time going to sleep because problems keep spinning in your mind? Does everything bad seem to happen to you? If so, you need my new book, The Only Advice You Will Ever Need. That's the title of the book. Advice? Do you have a lot of negative feelings bottled up? Get yourself some comfort food and eat your feelings. Struggling with finances? Get yourself to a casino. You'll probably lose a lot of money, but hey, chances are you might get lucky. Do you have insecurities about your looks? Improve your complexion. Maybe that way you'll finally be liked. If life gives you lemons, then chuck them at somebody. It's better to let out your rage than to keep it in. So when you don't know what to do, when you don't know who to listen to, when you don't know where to begin, just pick up my book. Let me show you the way. You can trust me. I'm a Catholic priest. Take my word for it. It can be yours for only 5 easy payments of $99.99, so get yours today. All proceeds will go towards the annual Catholic appeal. The author is not responsible for any negative side effects. Reader discretion, not advised. Who is in? Who wants a copy of the book? No? Gosh, couldn't fool you. Couldn't fool you. You know, it sounds ridiculous. It's like one of those bad and exaggerated infomercials we see on TV with bad actors who exaggerate everything. We see them, we see the products, and we wonder, who would buy that? Who would buy that? And then we think of ourselves as too smart to fall for false advertisement, yet they work. Many do buy them. Okay, so who of you at one point have owned the electric ab belt? The one that you can just sit down, watch TV, and you'll get chiseled abs? A Thigh Master? Oh? A Snuggie? Or one of those shake weights? You know? Oh, I know at least one of you has, okay? You can say you know someone, right? You know someone. Now, perhaps not everybody might fall for a bad infomercial, a bad product, but we do tend to fall for many other things in a very similar way. For example, many of us often fall for the wrong advice. We often listen to the wrong person. We easily get influenced by the wrong idea, a fad, an ideology. When the thing is that we're more prone to fall for this kind of bad advice when we are desperate, when something happens in our lives that throws us off, when there's an imbalance. And so when that happens, we seek guidance, we seek answers, we seek something to restore that which is lost. And we do it both at a personal level, but we also do it collectively, as a group, as a society. Now, in psychology, one of the terms that they use for this is herd mentality. And this happens a lot, this type of mentality or phenomenon happens a lot in both religious movements, but also politics. Because both religion and politics are tools for people to seek answers. And so it's natural that these are the areas where we will have the highest propensity for bad leaders and for people to follow bad advice. Now, there's plenty of historical examples of this. We've all seen horrific leaders who have persuaded whole nations to do horrific acts. We all also hear the occasional story in the news about a pastor, a religious leader of maybe a cult, who persuaded their followers to give them millions of dollars, and they end up buying lots of private jets and cars. I got to figure out how they do that one. You occasionally get some strange ones. Back in the 80s, there was a cult leader who convinced his followers that when there was a comet that was going to get close to the Earth, and he convinced them that that was a spaceship, and they had to commit suicide. And if they committed suicide, their souls would go to the comet, and that comet would take them to heaven. People fell for it. True story, look it up. It made the news. So like bad infomercials, all of us see these things that happen in our society, and we think, Who would believe something like that? Who would fall for it? But when desperate, when something is off in our lives, we are all prone to fall for it. Human nature. Now, it happened many times for the people of Israel. It's a human phenomenon, so we see it in Scripture all the time. And that's what Jeremiah is reflecting on this first reading. Now, first, the people of Israel, they lived in Egypt. They fell victims to slavery because of a bad leader. They get taken out of Egypt. They're in the wilderness for 40 years. Then together, collectively, they fell into idolatry because they got tired of waiting. So they came up collectively as a herd with a false god to give them security, to give them hope. They finally reached Jerusalem, and in Jerusalem, that promised land, they had bad leader after bad leader, and they themselves kept following the wrong advice after wrong advice. They couldn't discern properly. So they ended up slaves again in Babylon. And this is when Jeremiah is speaking. He's reflecting upon being slaves again in Babylon. And Jeremiah notices this trend, this herd mentality. And in his reflection, he realizes that the problem is inevitable. It's in every human individual. People are bound to follow. And leaders, even those with good intentions, are prone to lead astray. I mean, how many of us have hurt someone when we had the best of intentions? Sometimes we do that. So he comes up with this analogy to help people understand what's happening. And this analogy, he uses the image of a shepherd. This is where it comes from. Now, he says that a bad shepherd does not care to mislead people, where a good shepherd does care and does everything possible not to mislead. He says that a bad shepherd scatters his flock, while a good shepherd does everything possible to gather them, to keep them together. A bad shepherd will give you false information, while a good shepherd will always speak in truth. A bad shepherd will leave people in fear and trembling, whereas a good shepherd will always try his best to make you feel secure, make you feel at peace. Not care, care, scatter, gather, false, truth, fear, security, and peace. Now, people needed a good shepherd because it is impossible for any human individual to be able to embody these attributes that we need for good leadership perfectly. Then God intervened. He had to. God intervened and revealed to Jeremiah that God would provide then. God would provide this leader so that humanity could finally have someone who they could follow and would not be led astray. Now, as Christians, of course, we have the conviction, we have the knowledge, the certainty that this leader is Jesus. Hence why one of the titles we use for Jesus is shepherd, in reference to this promise that God gave to Jeremiah. Now, the Gospels then, which talk about the life of Jesus and his ministry and his teachings, the Gospel is God making a case for Jesus, God's infomercial, so to speak. It is God fighting to get our attention, God fighting to earn our trust in a world where there are many options of who to follow and advice. And he's fighting so that we realize that we need to stop searching for answers elsewhere, because like Israel, we might very well end up deceived time and time again in our lives. So when Jesus saw this, he saw the people. He saw the same phenomenon that has been happening in humanity time and time again. He was moved with pity, for they were sheep without shepherd. So what does Jesus do with this? He begins to teach them. Jesus begins to fight for their trust, invites them into this relationship so that they can realize he is all we need. He is whom we have been looking for. And in the same way, Jesus continues to fight for us today, for you, for your trust. Jesus continues to compete against other forms of influences and people that might promise you hope. And the challenge for us as Christians who accept Christ as that true shepherd is to entrust our lives to Christ. What does that mean? What does it mean to entrust your lives to Christ? First, it means surrender. Surrender. Surrender means letting go of the idea that we have control and then handing it over to Christ. Here's a prayer that I suggest for you that comes from the Ignatian spirituality. I'm heavily influenced by Ignatian spirituality, so you'll be getting some of that throughout my time with you. This prayer is called a suscipe, and Ignatian spirituality is prayed every night after you do an examination of conscience, and you see, where was God in my life today? Now this prayer says, "Take, Lord, take, and receive all my liberty, my memory, my understanding, and my entire will. All I have and call my own, you have given it all to me. So to you, Lord, I return it. Everything is yours. Do with it what you will. Give me only your love and your grace. That is enough for me." You know, that prayer, saying that prayer every night, it's not always easy to say, especially when we say it honestly. Because it's not always easy to surrender certain areas in our lives that we losing control of. But this is where trusting God comes in. If we don't, then when we lose control in those areas of our lives and we find ourselves desperate, then we're just going to be susceptible once again to falling victims, to bad advice, bad people, to be deceived by someone else or something. But if we surrender to Christ, then God will never take advantage of us. That's the promise. Christ will never deceive us. For we trust that Jesus is really that shepherd who holds those attributes that we look in other people, in ourselves, in other places. He holds them perfectly. Second, entrusting our lives to Jesus means living a life of discernment. Discernment simply means being open to God's grace in our lives. And in everything that we do, to always begin by a simple question. Lord, where would you like to lead me in this situation? You need to make a big life decision. Lord, where are you leading me? When we surrender our own desires and we honestly seek to seek God's will in our lives, then what happens in us, both in our conscience, in our spirits, in our hearts, is that we start becoming more sensitive to God. We begin to be like Christ. We begin to desire what God desires. And when we desire something true, something good, something beautiful, then it is that grace of God that allows us to identify and reject any bad infomercials that might be competing for that authentic truth, that authentic goodness, that authentic beauty, which can only be found in Christ. So surrender and discernment. Are you tired of not knowing what to do in situations of your life? Do you sometimes have a hard time going to bed because problems just keep making your head spin? Do you often find yourself in the wrong places at the wrong time and luck just never happens to be on your side? Well, have I got the solution for you. When you don't know what to do, when you don't know who to listen to, when you don't know where to begin, start with prayer. Just start with prayer. But don't take my word for it. I'm only a human. Go to Jesus and find out.